Great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Boris Mann. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada. I'm one of the leads of the AT Community Fund, and this is the first IndieSky working group meeting. Yay! Thank you, everyone, for coming. So we've got an hour. We can go long for those that have time. When I do these tech talks for ATProto, we usually have an off-the-record session where we turn off the recording as well. Otherwise, notes and things will be shared. We'll be using the shared notes. So please put stuff in there if you have it. And then my idea is that we'll probably lock this down after the event and copy and paste it into the ATProto wiki for kind of longer term lighter editing. I also want to hand it over to Ted. Ted, you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Ted Hahn. I have been working with Boris on Atmosphere Conf and the ATProto Community Fund. I guess it's the beginning of the year. It's been a lot of fun and interesting work, and really been excited to kick this off and connect with folks who I've known in the community and folks who I don't know in the community so far. And one of the important parts about this, of course, just for table setting for everyone, is how do we grow the broader ATProto community alongside Blue Sky as it continues to grow, because we want this entire ecosystem with ATProto to become a sort of multi-stakeholder ecosystem, which is why we're excited to have all of y'all here, and to talk about this and to start helping people level up both their understanding and also talk about what it means to actually run a community alongside this network as it grows.
So thank you.
Yeah, yep. Kick it back to you, Boris.
A little bit of overview of the community fund, links in the introductions. We ended up setting it up as part of running the Atmosphere conference. So we didn't want funds running through personal bank accounts, and we wanted to have transparent budgeting and all of that stuff. So we reached out to the Raft Foundation, and we have fiscal sponsorship in the US. That made sense because the conference was in Seattle. We were going to be dealing with US funds. We also think that there will be a number of different organizations over time. I'm in Canada, Ted's in the US. Nick is the third project lead. So the RAF Foundation is the only formal organization. And so we run this project over it where they provide all of our back end and banking services and various things like that. We do have an open collective set up. Specifically, we have a collective set up for IndieSky as well. Because we had a little bit of funds left over from the conference from sponsorships and ticket sales, we were already able to do what is our first kind of grant in the IndieSky category to Aviva of Deer.social, who needed some funds to like sign up as a professional Apple developer. So Deer.social will actually have mobile releases soon too, which I'm super stoked around to see that. I think that really has showed a lot for a lot of people. We also have a dedicated button where you basically, rather than needing Aviva and Deer.social to run their own infra, we said, hey, we can also have a spot where you can support Deer.social directly, and we'll send those funds to there. Other than that, happy to chat more. We've actually got a new email address that I will drop in here. Community fund at protocol.community. And so if you have any questions, want to get in touch with us, send that there and we'll get back to you. Obviously accessible on the internets and the atmosphere skies and the DMs and so on as well. I'll ask people again to fill out info about themselves and their needs in the notes. That way we can see a little bit of what everyone is seeing. Any questions? Happy to take a few questions about community fund or anything else. I'm rushing because we have 50 people and we have 1 hour. Um, so a quick overview. What do we think IndieSky is? So Indie for independent app proto infrastructure. I am using hashtag IndieSkyWG working group because it turns out there's a bunch of musicians and other things who already are on the IndieSky hashtag. You know, supporting independent infrastructure, I want to note that what we have right now is we have, 2,000 people self-hosting PDSs, mostly with one or two accounts on them. That is amazing, and that's amazing like dev excitement, but there's a lot of hard work to host a PDS for others, or host a relay that many people use, or all of the other components, right? We know that, shared labor or shared moderation is really hard to run. And so that's what we want to support. And our bias to those things that are group focused, community focused, and sustainable. Again, sustainable kind of meaning like for starters, we know that there's a lot of developers who have been running things that a lot of people are using, and they're paying out of their own pocket. So the simple part is like, hey, if devs are running interesting projects that is incurring server costs, let's make sure we're helping them to cover their costs. So Phil, bad example, or Red Solver with Skyfeeds, both of them are paying out of pocket right now. So those are the types of things that we see as no-brainer for IndieSky, and then working with them to say, how does this get shared and pooled among other people? Um, Policy is in here as well. We've had a number of developers who said like, I'm too freaked out to do anything because the Germans are going to come for me, because I haven't done quite the right thing, right? And laugh in American where it's like, haha, we've got an administration that's going to shut us down. So that's an area where Ted has a little bit of experience from his journalism background, but we're mostly going to be leaning into the freer feeds folks who have much more connections into policy and other stuff like that. In scope, ask if you need help. And then finally, growing jurisdictions. Maple Sky in Canada, Volst Sky in Germany, whatever we come up with there, I think it is important to start with data sovereignty. And so that's kind of the scope of what we're getting into. Any questions on that?
Can I just tag one thing in there too?
Please.
We can talk about also like what definitions of independent we want to sort of think about, and some of these things that we're going to be talking about here are very dev focused to begin with. But ultimately, as we're talking about what we want to grow out of this ecosystem, this is going to involve a lot of different folks too, and sort of how we make all of this gear accessible to end users, to creators, other people who are trying to build community within these spaces, and what degrees of control and independence people want and need to be able to facilitate the types of communities that they are looking to bring together.
A really good point. I've been at the beginning of a lot of tech waves, and one of the things that I do is I dive very, very deep into architecture so I can understand it, so that I can talk to real regular humans why they should give a shit and what it possibly enables. Very good point, Ted, generally in saying that. And I think maybe one more piece that Ted will cover as well is education, right? So we want to know both from devs to end users to give them some understanding, some digital literacy of how and why this works and what we might be able to do with it. Supporting mostly community leads, not end-to-end users, but a lot of the same material should help us all get on the same page. And I know Matthew Lowry was saying, "Hey, please help with ATProto University so that I can explain to Brussels what some of this stuff looks like." And again, I just got off the call with Blaine Cook, where same thing. We're going to try and do this in Canada, and really explain that the U.S. could cut off email for all of Canada, and maybe we should do something about that, right? So.
Yeah.
Now that we're all over the fun stuff, I would like to introduce Robin Bergeon from one of the custodians of Freer Feeds. So the news was that Freer Feeds is making a donation to the ATProto Community Fund that will allow Ted and I to actually get paid to work on running working groups and supporting others in doing this. We've been volunteering and have had, luckily, sort of the time and ability to be able to do that. And we want to basically have support like this really helps us. And so over to Robin to let us know a little bit more about Free Our Feeds.
Hey, thank you, Boris. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. And to be honest, I'd love to hear more about this thing where someone could cut off email, because that sounds like something I'd love to see happen at some point. More seriously, sorry about that. So yeah, I don't want to take up like a huge amount of time on Free Our Feeds at this point. If people have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. But I think I think it would be more productive for this group to like focus on all that we could achieve together in discussion here and afterwards. But like very briefly, I think Boris explained it, covered it very well. We're as a group, we're much more focused on policymakers and sources of funding that are not necessarily traditionally very aware of what happens in the tech ecosystem. Certainly not like stuff like ATProto that's more towards the edge and much more novel. So we have a lot of conversations with people who aren't extremely familiar with the word protocol, for instance, and stuff like that. And so what we've been trying is basically figuring out ways of bridging the huge amount of interest there is in doing something about the situation to like what could like how do we channel that into like something that looks like useful in involvement and ends up supporting a valuable project. So like we're really happy that of the few funds we have, we've managed to support this group already a little bit, but I hope that we can do a lot more. Just to give you a sense, like almost every week I have someone from some government or parliament or presidential team or something like that who comes and says like, I really like to build a European social media or Brazilian social media or you name it. And like the answer like that we have is always like, no, you actually don't. And so that's where you start the conversation of like, yes, you want to support the technology this way. You want to figure out ways of running independent infrastructure to support an ecosystem where other people could build stuff. Similarly, we have a lot of like conversations with governments who are like, we know that we have to do something about social media, but they tend to be terrified of doing anything around technology because they've heard that only the private sector can do cool tech stuff, and they're convinced that if they touch technology, it will immediately make it uncool. And thinking of like the official government social media service that like everyone cringes about. And again, that's a conversation where you explain that, hey, this is no different and definitely not more complicated than a million other types of infrastructure that you've run, that you already operate, like, from water sanitation to, power grids and etc. And if you just think about it in the right framing, cutting it up with the right architecture, etc., then there's no reason that you can't be a part of like making this work for everyone. So absolutely happy, if you have any questions, always happy to talk about this here or elsewhere. You know where to find me on the blue skies and stuff. So yeah, really excited to see this happening.
Awesome. Any questions for Robin about that, about Free Our Feeds? I'm gonna get you guys to ask a question at some point. I'm gonna make something really controversial, like what your favorite color is or something like that. Yeah, I think there's an interesting note here. I want to let everyone know we're continuing to tease Free Your Feeds about relays. Totally, it's now gotten to be a blue sky meme at this point. We're thinking between 30 and 100,000 Raspberry Pis just airdropped over Europe is what this is going to be used for. Yeah, Robin says we love relays. It's all good stuff. Yeah, Wesley has a good comment there. I think generally, as far as governments go, um, there was an interesting comment from the Save Our Socials speaker in Hamburg, saying basically that he didn't want to go down the path of continuing to talk about regulating big tech, or the framing in such a way, because they're always going to be commercially, corporately run, and regulating them almost kind of presupposed that they were part of the infrastructure themselves, like leave room to say like, no, no, we're going to build commons infrastructure and commercial companies need to be regulated. So there's something interesting there, and that I'm still working through. I know in Canada, for example, um, we passed some not so great laws, which just ended up meaning that news links are banned from being posted on Facebook, thus leaving only non-news links posted there, which is not a good outcome. So yeah. We are now at the architecture overview point. So we did this in Hamburg, and we have a bunch of notes on the wiki from this. And it was really, really useful to just walk through all of the components. And so I'm going to hand it to Ted to do that now. Please do ask questions. Feel free to put them in the chat as well, and I can ask them for you. This has been an iterative process for everyone, to understand what these parts are and which of them you need to enable different things. Over to you, Ted.
Cool. I'm going to go pretty fast, and my goal and intent here is just to give a quick overview so that we're sort of baselining some of the conversation. You may have seen this particular chart that the Blue Sky team put together that kind of describes what the whole architecture looks like. I've looked through this and kind of went, wow, I feel a little bit more confused rather than less confused at the moment. And there's a couple of things missing that I wanted to be able to talk with people about so that people can kind of understand, again, coming back to that theme of what are we trying to make independent, or what does independence kind of mean here? And, you know, we've called this IndieSky, and I think that that's important all the way back to the like indie rock roots. But there are alternative framings here that are important too. So Rudy from Black Sky, for example, says like maybe we should be thinking about resilience more than we should be talking about independence. And I think that's also something important to keep in mind. Like, what are we trying to free, or how do we want to be able to have some control or ability to make choices, and where we want to do that. This is something that Paul Frazier's talked about. In fact, he was talking about it yesterday, where, you know, cooperative interoperability is a valuable frame and something that the team has kind of tried to optimize for, which also, like, just shout out here. Like, I've joked that Blue Sky, the company, is basically a distributed systems company that happens to have made itself a hat that looks like Twitter, and so everybody thinks it's Twitter. But really, they're a fascinating distributed systems company. They've built a really compelling and interesting architecture, which is why we're here talking about it. So, with reference to that graph, the thing that I want to just kind of lay out here is, what does it mean to run infrastructure for participating in the ATProto ecosystem? And like, what is Blue Sky currently running? And so just to give everybody a quick sense, right? If you're a user, you can sign up through Blue Sky, and what they'll do for you is they will set up a little personal data server for you, create your account, and then you're kind of immediately off to the races. They have built this whole self-contained world where you don't have to think about any of the details, and everything works just the same way as it would for you if you were using Twitter. But the interesting and more compelling part about all of this is, how does this actually work under the hood? They've built this architecture so that actually third parties, other folks can plug into it in really interesting ways, so long as you're okay with everything that you're posting being public. And so it's worth talking about some of these individual layers. So the PDS layer, again, is where your account data lives. It's not the totality of what your account is. There are other pieces of this architecture that are important, which is namely, how does anybody know who you are? And that actually is run through an external service, which is still currently run by Blue Sky, called the Public Ledger of Credentials. It's basically a big, long list of all of the accounts and where your account data lives. So when you first create that account, it's not just the PDS that gets created and the account, but also a record in that ledger that says, hey, I trust Blue Sky to host my data for me right now. If you decide that you don't trust Blue Sky, you can actually migrate your account to another PDS outside of the Blue Sky infrastructure. So that's really the place where people have talked and focused a lot about on what does it mean to be decentralized. And this has even come up over the past couple of weeks where there's a DDoS of the Blue Sky PDS layer, but anybody who actually was running their PDS outside of Blue Sky's infrastructure continued to be able to feed data into Blue Sky and use the Blue Sky apps just fine. Um, what's interesting about this is that, you know, you can see the like immediate connections to decentralization and starting to break off different pieces of this and how we can have this kind of cooperative and in some cases permissionless structure for building. So if you are using Blue Sky just out of the box, right, when you load up the app, there are two feeds immediately that you're given, a following feed and a discover feed. And those are run in-house by Blue Sky, but you can also get feeds from third parties. And those are services that live external to Blue Sky. So in that sense, some of them are already free. That's one of those points where when you talk about things that have been, you know, conversations in EU policy circles about algorithmic choice, we have space to be able to grow and do a bunch of interesting things. It also opens up interesting business opportunities. So there are companies like Graze.social who have built a company around being able to make feed generation feed generation as a service, which even other devs have started to use, including Andra's newsfeed, which is very cool. So I just wanted to point out the fact that when we talk about some of these layers, we can actually run each and every one of these pieces independently. And people have started to do that. So Phil, who I know is I saw on the call earlier, has actually broken off every single layer of this and run it independently and is able to access and talk with everybody in the Blue Sky network without relying on any of the Blue Sky architecture directly. And so if you I want to make one other quick point here before getting back to talking about which pieces we want to break off and why we want to do some of this. If you as a user decide you want to post something, you load up the Blue Sky app on your phone, you send a message to Blue Sky, and what Blue Sky does for you is it sticks that message in your personal data store. That's the source of truth. And then from there, the rest of the system reacts to that post being created in your account, and that flows throughout the rest of the network for Blue Sky's purposes, including being stuck in other people's feeds and then being pushed down to other people's phones who are following you, for example. In doing that, right, you could have other apps that listen to this relay and react differently or do different things off of that. But another important thing to remember about this network is you can actually build apps that don't do anything with Blue Sky's infrastructure at all. And I like using Smoke Signal as an example. So Smoke Signal, Nick Giarkinis, who's on the call, it created, and it is an events system like Upcoming or something like that, where people can register events and people can RSVP for them. It doesn't need to talk to any of the Blue Sky architecture. People can already currently build apps that just talk to PDSs. And some of those PDSs could live on Blue Sky's architecture, or they could not. And one of the fun things about this is that these PDSs create an interesting opportunity for people to build these apps where users have the same sorts of guarantees with Blue Sky, access over your data, ability to move accounts to other spaces without actually having to rely on Blue Sky at this moment already, which I think is super exciting. But some of these pieces are useful for optimizing, like having a relay and having a fire hose of all of the posts that are going through the network, super useful, super interesting. And so when we talk about building independence or building an independent infrastructure, starting to talk about where we're trying to get to and why we want each of these pieces and how we can build on top of them and what we're trying to facilitate is a thing that I hope that we can carry forward in these conversations. So with that, I will toss it back over to Boris. And yes, there's a link to this diagram also in the notes, so feel free to come drop in.
Enrico has a question. And Enrico, do you want to ask it out loud for the record?
Yeah, sure. I had a look at the Arxiv paper, and I think I saw some architecture diagram elsewhere. And the client is always only connecting to the PDS. And my understanding was that that was the only way for the client to interact for like a mobile app or a web app to interact with the network. But in this case, I see there is a direct connection between the Blue Sky app view and the client. So I'm curious, like, is the PDS like a proxy for the clients to interact with the network, like either in a read or a write mode, or do we read, from the app view and we write into the PDS from client side?
Um, I'm gonna kick this to Brian. This is a slightly simplified diagram, and you can see the original diagram has arrows kind of going all over the place. There are a variety of ways that this can work. So let me pass it over to Brian really quickly.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways it can work, is the short answer. I think we're not super prescriptive about it. As a minimum, you could imagine, like, what if you just want to have a website and you just go to the website and log into the website, and that's like a Rails app, like a traditional Web 2.0 kind of thing. Like, there's no client in that case. Like, you could architect it in a way that the whole website would talk back around through. But for instance, the Statosphere example that we ship doesn't do it that way. It just talks directly. The reads from the website come directly. Another example would be like if you want any kind of public web interface, it's not, there's no user PDS, so there's no PDS to route through. There's a lot, we have a lot of, there's like advantages, there's pros and cons to going through the PDS. Like you can do authentication to any service in the network using the inter-service auth thing. That's kind of cool. Maybe we could do some other auth thing in the future, like UCANs, where you have device keys and you can authenticate without going through a PDS. There's some privacy advantages going through the PDS. The PDS could do extra things in the future, like be a CDN or be a cache and other stuff like that. But it's not, in some sense, it's not like super essential. And so there's probably some flexibility in how people choose to architect things.
Does somebody have
I
a
think
good link for UCANs as well that they could drop in the chat? Thanks.
We'll get that. Roscoe, go ahead.
Uh, I had a thought about like tying this into education. I've been thinking a lot about how we explain to users how the network works without being too verbose. And like simplifying this diagram down into something users can understand. Because saying it's decentralized, users don't really trust that. And a lot of them are very distrustful of like what tech bros say. And so my main thought is like distilling it down into PDSs and apps, uh, and just explaining to users that like any PDS can work with any app, and any app can work with any. That's where like lexicon comes in and it gets more confusing. I also had a question for Brian. You said there were pros and cons of proxying. What are the cons? Like, what are some of the negatives?
Briefly, you have to, everything has to go through the PDS, which depending on how, like the network infrastructure, right? Like if you live in Germany and you're traveling in Sri Lanka, then it's a long round trip back to Germany and back to wherever, or depending on like where the PDS is. So it has a latency impact. It makes running the PDS more expensive. You shift trust around. I think usually we think of the PDS as kind of your agent in the cloud, was a term we used previously. So that there's this implied pretty strong trust with the PDS. And that there should be a lot of optionality. Like you should be able to choose a PDS that you do trust because they're pretty easy to run. You could run your own or whatever. So trusting it with, for instance, your IP address, all these like kind of privacy concerns going through the PDS works. But on the other hand, maybe you don't trust your PDS and you do trust your app view. In that case, you don't want every single piece of traffic you do in the network going through the PDS. Right? It's like a big surveillance bottleneck. If you trust it, that's great. It's kind of like using a VPN. Like you get a little bit of protection where your traffic's going through something that you trust. On the other hand, if you don't trust it, then it's not great. So there's just kind of like trade-offs, and different people might make different trade-offs around that.
Yeah. And just to button it, your question up, absolutely, around the educational piece. Ultimately, some of these things matter to people out of the gate. Some of these things will only matter in failure scenarios. And so the fact that Blue Sky has talked about being billionaire proof, that's one way to sell it. But like, what does that actually mean to people? And how do you actually do two things? How do you express to people what the stuff means? And then second, tell them where it's going to matter. Because being billionaire proof isn't going to matter if we trust Jay. And for how long that will kind of take place. So we need to talk about what user benefits people get out of this as well. I will toss Johannes.
Go ahead.
Now, I have a very high level question, and I hope that's okay in this context. So I'm looking at this diagram, and if this project and a bunch of related projects are successful, then there's more and more boxes outside of the white shaded backgrounds, right? Because there's more and more independent infrastructure being built. It seems to me the more that is the case, the more third-party developers, all sorts of people are going to associate with that part of the network, the less it becomes possible for Blue Sky to monetize, generally speaking. So you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong, which makes it more difficult for Blue Sky to raise the money that they need to do and they're ready to generate the revenue.
Yep,
so Boris is shaking his head violently. Tell me how I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different nuances around this that in part is those of us who have dug into this architecture and kind of satisfied ourselves that this can be an open protocol and architecture includes how can a number of people make money by building different services on the network in different ways. And there's this cone of the future where we don't know where it's going to go. So one of the things that the technical architecture is, in fact, highly decentralized. Okay, whatever. I'm on record now. I'm going to say the word. Just so you know, generally in the Atmosphere app protocol community, we've said whatever. That doesn't even matter anymore. Other than the PLC directory, where all the DID identifiers are, where the plan of record is to spin that out into a separate entity, possibly multiple people hosting it and so on, right? Not exactly DNS-like, but kind of DNS-like in that way. So that is super centralized. Anyone watching at home, yes, the foundation of ATProto has a centralized component. Separately, Blue Sky has a lot of market power, meaning they've built a product that a lot of people like and then visit it. We have things like Deer.social, which is a fork of the open source code that's made available. That's pretty easy and cheap to run because it doesn't have that many reads and visitors to it. And recently people have run all of these different components, including every single account in the network with a 36 to 72 hour window on a Raspberry Pi relay, which itself is impressive. We think that many different people can make money at various different layers. So that there will be a larger and larger network that, as Roscoe said, lets people use their accounts across many different products and services.
So, some of this we should also ask ourselves, why do we care whether Blue Sky, the company, succeeds or fails? If we're talking about IndieSky, some of this is about hedging against what the company does and being able to find a path around some of this. So we absolutely care that they are the primary contributors and developers for all of this, and they are running the market power piece. But the extent to which the ATProto network can exist outside of Blue Sky, I think, is really one of the important parts of it.
So I think I totally buy the proposition for the community. There's lots of business opportunities all over the place. I totally buy the proposition for the users. It's certainly good for users to have alternatives. But if I imagine for a second that I was going up Sand Hill Road, raising money for Blue Sky, then the more of that exists, the harder it is for me to raise money. Now that the community may not necessarily agree about this, but if you say this is not the case, that's fine. So we don't have to spend more time on this than you want to.
Yeah, I think one thing to add is Blue Sky is also often a proxy for microblogging. Yeah, I personally think that is the least boring thing. We just haven't any person that I've walked this through, when I show them recipe.exchange, mostly I've had out loud gasps when they realize, oh, I literally can have my own recipes. Smoke Signal is probably the next largest kind of normie understanding. Oh, I understand what an event is, and I understand that I've been locked into meetup.com. And that's the one that I'm probably most excited. So I think we're going to play the same market power game with every single data type if we succeed. And in each step, we're actually going to have to be like, oh, we don't really want one giant global events provider. Oh, how do you self-host events? And that's the pattern that we'll follow. But we'll find out together in the future. David, go ahead.
So I'm building domain-specific network that uses the Blue Sky source code, but is running a totally separate stack of everything. So I've got my own PLC, my own social app, my own just one PDS because I've got 5 users, and so it's interesting to me just the steps that it took to get there, and a lot of it was like figuring out how to rebrand the social app because like of various things there. So I'm just like it's interesting like because I think a lot of the trend of the IndieSky thing is like how can we have everything interoperating, and I'm trying to do the exact opposite. So um but
Yeah,
but the
I think that's very interesting. I mean, the two that I know of is Deer.social, so that's the
yeah
one that's out in front. Um, and I want to respond to your whole I run my own PLC thing because I think that's an interesting thing to thought. And then the Canadian one, Gander.social,
yeah
is going to be colored in red, likely, and things like that. And I think you look at things like Pink Sky or Flashes, which are UX explorations that reuse everything.
yeah
I don't like it's great that the source code is open, that you can do
yeah
those things at
yeah
the social layer. I personally am not interested at all in
yeah sure
having network splits of running an own
right
PLC because it's very valuable to me. Like my big question as a technical user and using your system would be,
yeah
great, how do I move elsewhere?
yeah so the reason I'm doing is I'm trying to create focus things on a particular topic, and like it is a like different view, so I don't want everyone else to have the same view as me, but like I think that there sometime is value in not being distracted but focused, right? So that's the
So,
general
so,
idea, but the
so you can do
PLC is
that
just because
without you can
yeah.
do that without forking the PLC by having your own social graph.
Sure, sure. But like I just ran it because like I was using Itaru 2622's got this repo where he's got like this is how you run the whole stack. So like I ran the whole stack and then I'm like, okay, I don't know, should I use the main PLC? Like there are some things there that like aren't necessarily thought about because like let's say I end up building a network for children, like I may want to do different things in terms of privacy of so like the whole thing is entirely public at the moment. I know there's plans to do private data later. But so it wasn't obvious to me how to make that choice, if that makes sense.
Obvious around the PLC piece in particular,
Yeah,
because I think
yeah,
the key part about this is like what benefits do you get from running the PLC versus what benefits you get from being able to interoperate. And choosing not to interoperate is part of having the choice. But ultimately, I think that breaks down to what outcome you want to get to, and also like what's the point of running PDSs if you don't let people migrate. Uh, so like you're half making your life harder for yourself in some ways,
but
but there are
it's also
benefits if you do let people, right?
yeah, so
Let
the
people migrate.
protocol just doesn't like the PDS your like DID just assumes that you're using the central one, right? So there's no
Yeah,
like space in the URL for the DID
yeah,
to put a host name, which like so it didn't have to necessarily be designed like that, right?
right.
So yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Brian.
Yeah, I mean it's I don't think we designed the protocol to be like a totalizing vision for how like all
Yeah,
social interaction happens with computers. So it's like it's good for certain kinds of things. And if it's not fitting your I mean I'm not trying to be like this might come across really harsh, but like we think like focusing on a specific use case is important for it to come out well. And like adding complexity of like, oh, you can use it for public things, you can use it for private things, you can use it for like all of these things would just make it more and more complicated. It's already very complicated. It's quite
yeah.
difficult to like educate and onboard developers into the whole system, and adding more applications and use cases like gets more and more, it's like a lot of weight. We could get there over time, it might evolve there. The other thing that I feel very strongly about is like just borrow the pieces that work for you. Like take the chunks.
Yeah.
If the lexicon system works for you, take the lexicon system, leave everything else behind. You don't need to take the whole thing. Like mix the pieces together that work for you. But it's not a package that tries to do everything.
If any, I don't know if this is interesting to other people, but I do have like a scripted way of starting up your own full stack of this thing. So, which you could then connect in if you wanted to.
Yeah, please drop it into the notes. And would love to be able to follow up with some of that.
I know that Nick has and various other devs have various run everything locally for development purposes, including a PLC. So that's definitely a thing. So we'll make sure that we get links to that. That's exactly what we want to surface, is make more connections so people know where to find stuff. Roscoe, go ahead.
On the topic of trying to like have the entire stack and connect it all together, and moderation, like we at Spark, we've been trying to do like set up a moderation system that. Say again?
I think that was just background noise. Keep going.
Oh, got it. That connects to both a custom PDS and a custom app view. And I think that will be a big piece of like getting it so people aren't afraid to create custom app views because they don't know how moderation will work. Because if we know exactly what endpoints you have to implement for it to just work plug and play with Ozone, then that'll be a big unlock. We're still working through that. Haven't gotten it working. We've gotten it working with the PDS, not the app view. But yeah, we're hoping that that'll be something we can add to the docs.
Cool.
Awesome.
I mean, it's. Oh, go for it, Boris.
I was going to say, for those who don't know, Roscoe is on the Spark team, which is sort of the video mobile app that is already running its own PDS. And as Roscoe said, kind of intends to run its own relay, possibly in Brazil. And so is kind of one of the first apps out of the gate. Joe, and the video out. So Joe from the Spark team was in Hamburg and showed some screenshots of also doing mixing many different lexicon types in Spark, which I think is another really, really interesting thing that we're like all gonna like learn from together. So amazing, and thanks for dropping in and sharing, Roscoe.
Yeah. The thing I wanted to follow up on there is talking about this. We're talking about different service layers within the architecture and what the sets of concerns are. And right now, mostly when you're talking about the microblogging context, right, everybody is essentially freeloading off of Blue Sky's moderation services. And so as people continue to build out the network and build other lexicons and data types, we are going to need to figure out how moderation for those spaces work, and also who's listening and connecting to those pieces. So I'm glad that Spark is thinking about that and figuring out how to push it forward and figuring out what the scope is. Because like I assume that Spark is not trying to solve moderation for everyone over short form video. So being able to think about what the bounds of that are is also going to be important. And also where we can collaborate over those things too, since we now have at least 4 short form video services that are doing different types of things.
We've got just over 10 minutes. And so we've done a bunch of background and kind of touched on a number of different things. I want to, so we've got some people who have said like what they want to do and everything else like that. I want to make some statements and basically get people's reactions on things. And maybe we'll try and literally do a show of hands, or we'll try to do some voting or other stuff like that later in the docs. Is how many people are interested in doing PDS hosting for their jurisdiction or community where they'll be actively onboarding people that they don't know. Yeah. So I think the whole like right. So there will be two topics. There's one where you just do PDS hosting, maybe for a community, and the other one is PDS combined with an app that you're doing. Both are, I think, in the same category with some different needs. We've got a bunch there already. So that's great. Are those actual hands for things on this topic? Anirudh? Go ahead, please.
No, sorry, I meant I was raising my hand in accordance to whatever you
Okay.
said.
Which is good too. Yeah. So I think that's going to be a cluster where we can have a breakout group in the IndieSky Ahoy notes. Lawrence did actually a really great job of the bunch of things that he would like answered. Many of them are policy and other things like that as well. So we'll make sure to point those into the notes, and I think that's a whole area where we can work together as one cluster.
Two quick questions. I just listed this as interest in running infrastructure in the notes. Can people drop their handles in there on line 63 or 62-ish? And
Yeah,
Boris, back to you.
I think let's just make it specific to PDS. I think there's other pieces there like relay that in some ways we've now said like sure, but like that's not the hard part. Chris, is that a real hand from you?
It's a real hand. Well, it's a real virtual hand. I don't know how to explain it, Boris. It's too technical for me. I dropped this in the chat, but I'm seeing that like we got to actually raise our hand if we want to surface a question for the team. So
Yeah.
I wanted to throw this out there as I'm hearing like run your own PDS and startups coming and building PDSs, which is super awesome. But what happens when the startup that I chose to get started on goes out of business and all my PDS data is, vaporized? Is anyone working on tools to back up PDS data so that I, as a user, don't give a shit that my PDS of choice happened to be a recently started company that may go, may be gone tomorrow? And the reason this is an important question is it kind of undermines the brand of the whole architecture if people come on through a startup and then put a bunch of data in there, and then in 2 weeks or a month later it's all gone.
See, also your Mastodon server goes down, right?
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
The Seattle conference had Storacha doing live backups. Andra, other than doing infra backups of North Sky, are you doing anything else interesting in there?
Yeah, so we're kind of working on just general reliability and kind of backups and things on like a service level. One thing that we're building out to help migrate people to North Sky is a migrator tool. I'm working with the rest of the team. I'm working on the front end for that, and the rest of the team's working on the back end for it. I think the plan is to release all that open source at some point soon. Just have a graphical migrator tool available that people can use. And yeah, that should help kind of migrate people's accounts between various PDSs, which is, I think, kind of a point that's missing at the moment.
So let's highlight this as an area, basically, just generally speaking, access and sort of user control of identity, and then also data migration and sort of data backup.
And I wanted to specifically point this out, and obviously I'm calling Andra because they were in Hamburg as well, and North Sky's kind of been out of the gates with these things. But knowing that software is coming in open source, I would say anyone who is interested in running their own PDS, one of the ways that you're going to onboard people of your community is to move people. And so y'all should think about pooling your dollars or pooling your developer time to work on that migrator tool together, right? So that's an example of an area where we could pool both money and developer resources. Is that how we indicated? And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do is come up with common areas where ultimately we are still a pretty small community with very few dollars, but we have a lot of enthusiastic people, and we should try and share, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
Spark is also working on a migrator tool right now, and we currently have a public PDS. And we'll try to implement data backups into the migrator tool as well.
Cool.
And
Yeah.
just being able to retrieve your keys.
Yes, there's a couple of things happening around keys as well. So for those who don't know, that's another sort of backup piece. And to answer Chris more directly, I think we're going to have to see some real examples of this, including um, imagine another migrator tool or the same migrator tool that lets you migrate in a situation where you've got an adversarial or down PDS, right? That should be another thing that also needs to be graphical. And that's the real point that you pointed at, right? Like, okay, I've already gotten to another one once. It's gone down. I don't want to lose all my stuff. So not just migration, but the rotation keys so that you can maybe we should have another word for rescuing your account. Sebastian, go for it.
Hey, we were thinking, we're two people now at Flashes, and we're thinking about working on a mobile PDS that would run on your phone to keep your data on your phone, and then sync up with a PDS proxy that would be hosted. And that way you could leverage a secure enclave on your phone to secure your data. You would always have your data with you. And yeah, that is something that we were thinking about the last 2 days and worked through it. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
I think you should totally write it up. I know a bunch of people were super excited about that. And again, I'm just going to tease Bailey, who's one of the only few IndieSky monthly contributors, be like, that sounds like a Bailey nerd snipe. But more seriously, there's a bunch of people that have wanted that, some from the P2P land and just from the like, what if we do stuff fully at the edge? So any of this stuff, like what I would recommend is like write up a wiki page, put some of your initial thoughts on there. And then like tell people where to come find you, whether that's a GitHub or anywhere else in there. I know the Blue Sky team have looked at some of that in the early things, and the IRO team is very interested in that. So they do P2P transfer IROH. Yeah. I think we have time for one more on the record question, comment. Emily, you and your team talked a lot, and I didn't want to write it all out. I kind of hinted it. Do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about what you want to do and what you're thinking today and what you need help with?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for all of this. It's really interesting. I'm definitely stealing some of the ways that like Ted explained the Blue Sky as well when I like tried to sell this stuff. So to explain a little bit of what we're doing, we are myself and Vince, who's also here, who's one of our developers. We're basically a group of people kind of related to astronomy and astronomy stuff. And we're trying to kind of, well, we have our like feeds that show a lot of posts, and we'd also like to expand into future things. And kind of our goal really is to not just replace what Twitter was for scientists in our community, but to completely exceed that, and it completely exceed like the levels of independence that you can have for our community and for us as scientists, especially for us in astronomy and so many other kind of fields of science. It's so important that we're able to like do outreach and have discussions professionally and do so many different things with social media, and having that just like go poof when the next billionaire buys the next platform is like a complete no-no. So one of the things that we're thinking about doing in the future is not just hosting feeds, but also hosting PDSs and trying to give people in our community some kind of data independence. So we can say like, yeah, we're not just like a thing that we're building on Blue Sky, we're a thing that's like completely independent of that, and we can do kind of like all the kind of like data security things, and like, I don't know, just yeah, add more independence. But yeah, really excited for this initiative, especially I think for kind of PDS hosting tools and trying to make things more seamless, I guess, as well for users. Like right now, to like migrate your account, obviously it's like there's a few bits of migration tools around, but it's like you have to be quite technical to know what that is and to even know why that's important and what that means. So like, yeah, I'm really excited to see how kind of these things develop and what tools can come up. And yeah, we develop a lot of our own stuff in-house for like how the feeds run and stuff like that. But I think for PDS hosting, it would be amazing if there's like one tool that just works that we can use for that and that like we can host somewhere. So yeah, really exciting initiative.
Amazing. I think there's two pieces to that. So one, shared tooling of things like Migrator, and I think the like part two is the why as a community, what like new capabilities that I get, and from there may even be labeling or badges or something like that that you can do automatically. Like for example, there's a posts from your PDS that is a feed that someone has built. Obviously, you wouldn't build a real feed on that, but it's sort of a thing. The other thing I wanted to key in on, there's multiple people on this call. So Torsten is here, and there was a longer discussion essentially around academic usage of ATProto. Both new apps and just starting with a check mark of data sovereignty. And again, with content addressing, preprints, PDFs, I want to really highlight for everyone, I think data sovereignty as a start is easily explainable, right? I'm hosted with my friends at the astronomy community. My university hosted something. I have my data in Canada is actually pretty explainable. Like if you directly ask people, they'll be like, okay, if it's not a giant pain in the ass, the next level out people won't. They'll need to be more sold or understood and so on, which is us as product builders. That's one of the pieces that we haven't talked about here, right? It's not just doing it because you can, although it's a good vibe to start with. So I think there's probably like, we don't want to run one big group that does everything. We want to say, hey, there's a whole PDS hosting group. Maybe Lorenz wants to run with European PDS hosting as a deep dive on that. Academic hosting is definitely a thing. The discussion in Hamburg was, what do I tell my IT guy? Moderation, how does that work for PDSs, or what are my responsibilities, right? So that's the other point of this, is to find these clusters and make connections. I think PDS for app builders or indie app builders and so on is also another cluster. So there's 3 clusters that actually have a shared need. So I'll say like jurisdiction or data sovereignty, community, and academic. Not to say that academic isn't maybe that's in there, but I think it's a special case. And then the app ones that we can identify in there as areas. And we didn't even get to relays, app views, or headless app view. There was a question about it, and I know Rachel. Please, Torsten, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to this that I mean, in Hamburg, we talked about how to talk to the IT guys. And I was thinking a little bit how to talk to the administration and the regulators, but now I fall back to talking about actually the use cases again. So I had a meetup with Yannick today, who gave a presentation about the catchy term open educational resources. And I pitched this term in my group, and this was something they could relate to. So I think we will really go back. Yeah, we have to rewind a little bit. Unfortunately, I would really like to hack on stuff, and I also started to not the PDS, but I started with the relay stuff to just to see how the tool stack works, and I would be happy to connect with all the people who are interested in academic use cases, and then yeah, somehow we need to, well, maybe we can do like a parallel to the interesting technical stuff in our free time, and talk to talk to academics in our job. Maybe just so Emily, I would really like to connect with you and everybody else who maybe you can leave a note in the notes document. Maybe we can have just a, yeah, like a, I don't know how it's called.
To be clear, as a product person, I have to say it is excellent to always ask yourself the question, what do the users get out of this? Should I actually build it before? So like, yeah, that's great. And coming back to that and driving the conversations around, I think is awesome.
Yeah, it's actually two parts, the things that I already know, why ATProto is cool and why I'm here. And I just need to write this down and then explain it in a way that is also interesting for academics. But then I think we also need some specific smaller things like open educational resources really has a lot of problems now. And if we also explain it in this, yeah, like smells, like, yeah, things that don't work now in the academic world. So this could be also a way to go. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're at time here, and I know people have to drop off. We've got the notes. We'll move the notes to the wiki, which is something else that we're running as a community. We will send out everyone who registered. We'll send out an email. The Blue Sky API Touchers, which is the community Discord. Right now, we're thinking we will have a working group channel in there. Again, we don't want to be super prescriptive. Gather in other groups, form a single group if you want, connect with each other and have shared areas we can talk about stuff. There's a kind of a whole stack that we talked about in Hamburg. I think there's probably going to be a whole thing in running things in Europe. So that'll be another cluster. There will be a cluster in Canada that's literally already forming. So these are the types of things. Ask for help. Right? So we're peers, we're happy to help each other out. Some of it is wording and everything else like that. We are happy to take, like we have people saying, I could really use $100 a month to run these services that I run for my community. That is exactly what we want some of the funding for IndieSky to go to, where we can say like, great, here's $1,500 and you have hosting for a year. We then need to work together to like get that to sustainable. But this is a way that we can work together in kinds of things, right? There's bigger projects like, can we work together to gain funding for European moderation? I say that very directly because that ends up being one of the concern areas. Freer Feeds has lots of ties in there where we could run a relay, we could run moderation, then there are app builders in Europe who can safely go to market, basically. There's a nuance in there around custom lexicons that really no one has tackled. And we also know that Ozone, the moderation tool, Blue Sky is maintaining it and making it available, but it also needs lots of work. Eduardo, please.
Hi, I just wanted to give my own 2 cents before the meeting ends.
Yeah.
I think everything that IndieSky is doing is like really important and everything. I really like it. I'm someone who's like really enthusiastic about tech and open social media and like open source media as a whole. But the problem is I'm not very tech savvy. Like I've only written like a couple things of code. Like I'm not really like too technical in like just like the back end and the front end space of things. So, and I think it's really important to just have like everyone of all skill levels kind of be in this community because I think it's important that like we have like all like we have like social media managers and business people and financial experts and stuff like that. Everyone of all different skill levels, people who are not necessarily like even into tech can even join because I think it's like a big community. Like I was thinking like there was this comment I saw like on a Blue Sky post, I think it was, saying like, "Oh, I had an idea for like a social media that's like specifically on like climate and climate news, but I have no idea how to make an app for it. Like I've no sources, no nothing." So I just think IndieSky is a really good community to help get things like that started. But I just think it's should be easier for people to get into IndieSky and like other communities like that and stuff like that. So that's just my 2 cents. Yeah.
100% agree.
That's great.
Yeah. I think we need to get some of the building blocks in place and be able to describe and talk to them, talk about them to folks so that we can build these structures up and talk to people about what they get out of it. Ultimately, all of this stuff matters about what does the end user get out of this at the end of the day? There are a variety of different end users.
Mhm.
We are the people who hopefully can make some of that stuff happen. So yeah, you shouldn't have to be super technical to participate.
Yeah, plus is there
think-
like some sort of after party after this so we can get to know like other developers and stuff?
Sure.
Like I'm just asking.
I'm gonna I will take us off the record in a second. I think that's a call for education and sharing. So we definitely will have that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the misconceptions has been you absolutely have to run anything to do something custom. And so there's been amazing stuff done just with feeds. So how do we get people to create a custom feed that's all around climate news? And that's it. That's literally all that they start with. And that's an amazing. Or the games industry labeler is another project where they went one up from feeds and they do a little bit of verification of like someone being an official publisher or other things like that. So we should totally welcome a ton of, but do a better job of it, of saying that there are a ton of non-technical paths that are mostly about community building that people can get started with right away, and they can do lots before they ever have to go, okay, here's where I have to start running my own stuff or doing custom code. There's tons to do before you hit that point, and we need to do a better job championing that.
Okay.
So thank you.
That's all I had to say.
Perfect.
It's an excellent reminder. Thank you.
Yeah. Ted, anything else from you? Any last words of
excited about the conversation, looking forward to where we go from here.
Awesome. So let's wave to the camera as I stop recording.